Good morning, friends, and welcome to another edition of Storytime. Ken Cruz here, and thank you for joining me on this Wednesday, October 1st. I'm coming to you live from the home studio over here on Apple Tree Lane in Valparaiso, Indiana. You know, it's October already, and of course that gets me to thinking about Halloween. The decorations have already been put up in some homes. The stores have already taken the decorations out to make room for the Christmas decorations. But Halloween, of course, reminds me of scary stories. And today's story that we are going to share from the Bible can be kind of a scary story. But not in the same way that maybe a Halloween story is scary. It's scary because God is going to ask Abraham to do a very hard thing. In fact, the hardest thing. Have you ever had to do something very hard, very difficult? Have you ever felt like maybe God was calling you to do something hard? I invite you to think about it for a minute. I know that God invited my family to do a hard thing. Some number of years ago, God invited my family to sell our home, to pack up all of our belongings, and to move to Chicago, to go into ministry together. It was really hard for my whole family. We left our friends and our neighbors, everything we knew. And then, God wasn't done yet. After a few years, God asked us to do another hard thing. And that hard thing was actually to move back home to Indiana. We had made friends in Illinois and our ministry was thriving. But through it all, God was with us and amazing things have happened. Today's story is hard because it invites us to think about a challenging word. Can anyone think of a challenging word for you that makes you think of difficult things? Well, our difficult word today is sacrifice. God is going to ask Abraham to make a very difficult sacrifice. Now that is a tough word. What do you think it means, this word, sacrifice? Well, sacrifice can mean to give something up. And today, God is going to ask Abraham to give up one of the most important things in his life. God asks us all to make sacrifices, to give up things. But when we give them up, it makes more room for God's love. Friends, I'm so excited to share our story with you today because it's not me that's sharing, it's the Lawson family. I'm so excited for their creative telling of today's story, The Hardest Thing. And we're so thankful to Johnny and Molly and Mrs. Lawson and Mr. Lawson for being such an amazing family and creating space to tell one of God's hard stories. And we're thankful to Elizabeth Caldwell and Carol Wareheim and all of our friends who have put together and published the Growing in God's Love, a Story Bible. We're going to learn more about Growing in God's Love, a Story Bible curriculum in ways that you can connect after our story today. So I invite you, put your listening ears on and get ready for a really creative telling of a story from Genesis 22, verses 1 through 19, The Hardest Thing. Won't you join me?
For today's story time, we're going to read a chapter in Growing in God's Love, a Story Bible, written by Elizabeth F. Caldwell and Carol A. Wareheim. It's called The Hardest Thing. It's based on Genesis 22, 1 through 19. Some stories, even some stories in the Bible, make it really easy to tell who the good people are. The good people are really good people. In this story, Abraham is the really good person. He is so good that he trusts God even when God asks him to do the hardest thing. This story can be hard to read because God asked Abraham to do such a hard, scary thing. And it doesn't tell us what Abraham is thinking. Remember, this story is about telling everyone how much Abraham trusts God. That's the good news. in this very hard story. Abraham didn't know that God wanted to test him when God called.
Abraham,
"Here I am," Abraham said.
take your son Isaac, whom you love so much, up a mountain. I will show you which one. There will do a very hard thing, the hardest thing. You will offer your son as a burnt offering.
People offered gifts to God by burning them in those days. Usually it was an animal like a lamb, not a human like Isaac. Abraham got up early the next morning and packed for the trip. He took a donkey, firewood, fire, a knife, his son Isaac, and 2 servants from his house. After traveling for 3 days, Abraham saw the mountain was still very far away. He left the donkey and the 2 servants. He said, "We will be back after we worship God on the mountain. Stay here." Abraham put the firewood on Isaac's back. Abraham carried the fire and the knife for the sacrifice. Isaac noticed that they had everything for a burnt offering except the lamb. "Father," he said, "where's the lamb for the burnt offering?" "God will provide the lamb, my son," Abraham said. Now comes the scary part. On the mountain, Abraham piled up the wood for a big fire. He tied up Isaac and put him on the pile. Just as he picked up the knife, a messenger from God called from heaven.
Abraham, stop. Don't touch Isaac. Now I know that you trust God. You were willing to do the hardest thing, hurt your son, when God told you to.
Nearby, Abraham saw a ram stuck in a bush. He offered it as a burnt offering instead of Isaac. God's messenger called to Abraham,
God says, because you have done such a hard thing and were prepared to offer your son to me, I will make you this promise. Your family will be as many as the stars in the sky and sand on the beach. And they will be safe for a long, long time. Everyone in the world will be blessed because of your family.
What a great blessing! Abraham and Isaac went back to the servants. They all went home together. So, for the rest of the week, something to think about for the hearing. What is the scariest story you've ever heard? How did it make you feel? Did it make you wonder about God? What did you wonder? C, have you seen something you needed in an unexpected place, like a ram in this story? What was it? And act, what sorts of things do you think God asks you to do?
Wow, that was a difficult story to hear. To hear about the hardest thing that Abraham had to do. Miss Trish asked some great questions at the end there. What things might God be asking you to do? Friends, God does ask us to do all kinds of things. And sometimes it involves sacrifice. Not the kind of sacrifice that God was asking Abraham to do. That kind of sacrifice of animals or grain and different things was really important to the Hebrew people at that time. God doesn't ask us to make those kinds of sacrifices in our lives necessarily, but maybe there is a different kind of sacrifice that we might be getting called to do. Maybe God is asking us to sacrifice, money that we might spend at Target or Walmart on a toy, or maybe money spent at the movies, or going out to dinner, or getting ice cream. Maybe God is asking us to sacrifice that money to help somebody in need, especially during these challenging times of COVID. Maybe God is asking me to sacrifice the cup of coffee from Starbucks to help out somebody in need. Maybe God asks us to sacrifice time playing video games to spend with family or friends who really need some of our attention. And we need theirs too, because people are made to be together. Friends, I hope that you enjoyed and were challenged by today's hard story, talking about the hardest thing. And remember that while the Bible and our lives are full of amazing stories and some hard and difficult stories, God is with us in all those places, inviting us into new life, inviting us into joy and hope. So, friends, I want to invite you now to be creative. The Lawson family did a fantastic job of using some Lego to share an amazing Bible story with us today. And every other week throughout this whole fall and into the winter and the spring, every other Wednesday story time is going to be dedicated to a Bible story. A Bible story that we'll use then in our Sunday school program the following Sunday. We'll be talking about it in our Faith Finders Sunday school program. So, look on our website, and your parents are going to get emails to all of our FPC families, inviting them to sign up for your family to share a story with us. You can use Lego, you could use animation, you could sing it, you could tell it dramatically, or maybe you'd just like to read the story and share it with us. However you'd like to, we want to invite you to share stories with us this fall and this winter. If you got any questions, just shoot me an email, kencruz@fpcvalpo.org. Or you can email Miss Trish at tmlawson77@yahoo.com. Friends, we want you to participate with your family in the amazing story that is God's story. God's story in the Bible and God's story in this amazing world that we live in. Until we see each other again, friends, peace be with you.